thoughts from a narcissistic abuse survivor on the Reesa Teesa Who the Fuck Did I Marry series. So I got through it yesterday, started yesterday and finished it yesterday. I listened to it on YouTube double time so I could get through the whole thing because I must admit, once I got started, I was like, I'm in, I'm fascinated. And I had to switch from TikTok over to YouTube so I could watch it faster because I realized I wanted to watch the whole thing. So my immediate thoughts as a narcissistic abuse survivor and also as someone who did narcissistic abuse coaching for other women who've been through narcissistic abuse, my immediate thought was, one, even though everyone is like, this story is so crazy, like this story is wild, this story is out of control, I was like, this story actually fascinating, juicy, right? It made me want to know more and hug her. But it did not feel so crazy to me as someone who survived someone who is not that person, who is not Legion, but put me through a very similar level of trauma as someone who I believe has narcissistic personality disorder, and as someone who has suffered pretty severe emotional, verbal, psychological, narcissistic abuse for many, many years. It felt, unfortunately, very typical, very standard. Also, as someone who did narc abuse coaching for other women, I was like, wow, this story is not even, sadly enough, as bad. And when I say as bad, like more traumatic events, more psychopathic behavior. But I was feeling like this isn't even as bad as some of the women who I coached, who were more stuck, more ingrained, more financially dependent, had children with the psychopath or the narcissist or the pathological liar, didn't have what she had. Let me also just say really quick first, I really, really, really love her from what I know of her, from telling these stories. I think she's absolutely amazing. I think she's a beautiful person, and I think that she is so strong, and I loved her demeanor. I loved how she kept constantly taking accountability for her choices, for what she did, even when she said it would make her look bad. I love how she explained what happened very factually. I just love how she went about it. I think that we could all learn a lot from her about resilience, regaining a sense of self and self-worth. The way she cut him off so definitively is not something that I personally did or could have done if I were in her circumstances. And that's the reason why I was so traumatized for so many years, is because I couldn't leave. I did not have the self-worth. I didn't have the self-love. And I was also very trauma bonded. But anyway, I just wanted to say, before I say anything else, that I respect her so much in her journey. And when I have seen just a couple people, I've seen just a couple other people say like, well, I can't believe she stayed that long, and I can't believe this, and I can't believe that. And I'm like, child, I can, because I did. I can, because I did. And I've also interacted with other women who are just as intelligent, who are just as smart, and who have been roped in, love bombed, deceived, manipulated, and trapped by a Legion. I'll just say a Legion. And I'll say a Legion as representing a psychopath, a sociopath, a pathological liar, or someone who has narcissistic personality disorder, or who is very toxic or very narcissistic, even if they're not diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. So she kept saying, if you notice, she kept saying like, I'm an intelligent woman. I'm an intelligent woman. I knew this, I knew that. And yet she kept going. And I feel like sometimes that gets lost, because the women I know who I coached, who I'm still really close with, I'm still close with 3 of them and myself. Like, we are all college educated women. You know, I have a bachelor's degree. I have almost a master's degree, and one master's that I just decided I didn't want to do anymore. So I stopped, and now I started another one, and I'm about a little more than halfway through my second master's degree. I've spoken all over the country. You know, I'm an educated professional-ish. And I got roped into something at just the wrong time of my life that if I were to tell my story TikTok style like she did, if I were to tell it detail by detail the way she did, it would make me look so bad. There would be so many more times than her that I would have to say, I made this choice, and then I made that choice, and I made this choice. As a side note, I do actually have a 6-part series on my YouTube channel of what I endured in terms of going through narcissistic abuse and verbal abuse. I also have a whole series on what verbal abuse is and how verbal abuse plays out and how I went through very severe verbal abuse. So you can see that on my channel. I never went through like she did, like detail by detail. There is 1 year that my ex was pathologically lying like that about other women. And what he was doing was something called drip feeding, which was like only drip feeding the truth, only just enough to make you think that they're telling the truth, but you're being gaslit, so you know they're lying. It produced a giant level of cognitive dissonance in me, which, if you don't know, can make you go crazy. It can make people go crazy when someone is gaslighting you about your reality that you know is not true, but they're also telling you some true things, and so you just don't know what's true and what's not true. It literally makes you go crazy. So there was a time watching her videos yesterday that I felt the same feelings in my body that I was feeling when I was going through a solid year or so where my ex-husband was lying to me constantly, trying to cover up a date. A date he went on, just one date. He would have, anyway, it would have relieved so much tension and pressure if he had just told me he went on the date, but instead he told me just enough truth and just enough lies to keep me like she did, looking like the CIA and the FBI and Homeland Security trying to figure out what the hell happened while I was pregnant. And what happened? Was it a date? Was it just one date? Was it 10 dates? Was it sex? Is it love? What is going on? And then finding out, when I did finally found out what I figured out, I actually went into labor early. I was so traumatized. And then to find out later it was just one fucking date where they apparently didn't even sleep together. I'm like, why didn't you just tell me? Like, you literally drove me insane. That was just one little part of it. But my point is that hearing someone's story that felt eerily similar was very triggering for me yesterday. Like, I was telling my friend, there was something that happened to me when I was going through what I was going through with my own legion of sorts, where when he would be verbally, emotionally, psychologically abusive, so that includes like yelling, screaming, name calling, lying, drip feeding, gaslighting, any of those behaviors that were intentionally manipulative, he would do things to get reactions out of me. Same thing as Reesa was saying. When that happened to me, my body would tell me by my cheeks right here would fall. I would literally feel my cheeks fall. It's really weird. It's only ever happened in that scenario. It's never happened at any other time in my life and has not happened since. Okay. So I could feel the balls of my cheek like fall a little bit. And that's eventually how my body was telling me, like, you're being abused, you're being lied to, you're being psychologically manipulated, you're being gaslit. It got to that point where it was so spot on. It was just like my body's warning system. Like, if you feel your cheeks fall, don't believe him. Swear to God. Anyway, yesterday while I was listening to her story, I could feel my fucking cheeks fall. I was like, oh my God. I have not felt that feeling since 2020, since January 2020. Right now, I'm filming this it's February 21st. This is wrong. It's February. I'm not going to change it right now. It's February 21st, 2024. I have not felt that feeling for 4 years and 1 month. And I could feel it while she was telling her story. And I felt so insanely triggered. If you are a narc abuse survivor, or I'll just say a legion survivor, if you are a survivor of if you're a woman who's a survivor of a psychopath, sociopath, emotional abuser, psychological abuser, NPD, toxic man, high narcissistic traits man, you likely felt very, very fucking triggered because after my cheeks fell, because I was listening to this like in the innards of my day. It was like I had my phone, I had it on YouTube. Sorry, my cat's over there making a mess. I had it on YouTube, so I'm like cooking, right? I get my daughter to school. I turn it on. It's in the seat while I'm driving home, So then I came home. I'm doing laundry. I'm listening to it. I picked up my kids from school. I had it like this, okay, like on my ear, so I'm listening to it. And then I was bringing all my kids. I had picked them all up from all their 3 schools. I was bringing them back, and I had it, and I was listening to it in the car, and I could feel my cheeks falling, and I could just feel like this heaviness rest over my chest. And I was like, Grace, like, listen to your body, take a break from this. Like, you are actually literally physically triggered in the way that the word trigger means. I know everybody uses that word to describe, like, oh my God, I felt anxious. But like the real way that triggered, like what that word means is your body is actually physically triggered, and your nervous system starts to dysregulate. And that's what was happening. My nervous system was dysregulating because I could feel the heaviness. I could feel the cheek things, which fucked me. Oh, I mean, not fucked me, freaked me the fuck out, because I just haven't felt that in so long. And I was like, okay, I'm experiencing secondary trauma from hearing this, like, stop. So I took a break, like, did dinner with my kids. I went swimming with my son and his girlfriend and my daughter, and then came back, put my daughter to bed, had a conversation with a friend, and then I was like, I just really want to finish this. So I came back to it. But I did want to relate to all the women who felt like I've dealt with this. It's just different circumstances. So there's a few things I wanted to say about ways that God saved her, and ways that you may not have had the same thing as a trauma survivor that kept you in it for longer. So, like, number one, she had family and had family support. And a lot of us who are survivors out here don't have that kind of family support. A lot of us who are survivors out here, the reason why we married men who psychologically battered us so badly that we have literal fucking brain damage, which I have brain damage from going through that kind of trauma, like actual literal brain damage from that kind of abuse. And I'm not talking about battering. I'm talking about like literal psychological abuse. It ongoing produces, well, first of all, I got an anxiety disorder from it called complex PTSD. I was diagnosed with complex PTSD. Then I was diagnosed with acute stress disorder. This was like a year or two into a 4-year journey of psychological, manipulative, gaslighting, cognitive dissonance, hell on earth. It's the worst thing I've ever experienced. And I think that Reesa would probably say the same thing. I think she did say the same thing at the end. But what she had that I didn't have is family support. And I think a lot of women who've been through something like this, the reason why they go through something like this is because they don't have family support. They don't have that covering of their father. They don't have that protection. They don't have that support to fall back on. And so they're vulnerable. I was also just recently divorced, which is another reason why I was so much more vulnerable to someone like him. And I had children from my previous marriage, so I was financially vulnerable, hugely financially vulnerable. I had just lost the house that I bought with my ex to my ex, my first ex, before I met the Legion. So I was very, very financially vulnerable. I'd lost a house. I'd lost a retirement fund. I was divorced. I had lost a job. I had lost my sense of self. I had lost my identity. I had lost so much. And then here he comes along love bombing. And I was like, I found my king, and sewed them red flags together and made myself a scarf and wrapped it around my neck so I could feel warm. And I acknowledge and I admit that was, not a good choice. But like her, the ways that I relate to her was that, for her, she had never been married before. And she was like, it's going to be too late for me. I want what I want. God, I want to get married. And so she pushed that forward. For me, there was 2 things that were really damaging me that I relate to, and probably a lot of other survivors relate to, that pushed me into a situation like that, is that I had the vulnerability of having 2 kids that I was just like, I can't, at that point, I felt like I can't provide for them. I need to get married again. I need to have someone else helping me. I can't do this. I also wanted another baby, and I was inching on, at that point in my life, I was 38. Yes, I was 38. So I'm like, my fertile window is about to drop. Like now I figured out my fertile window is still here, and I'm 47. Okay, my fertile window did not go anywhere. I'm still fertile AF, I found out. But anyway, so I was also dealing with that. I was also in evangelical circles, and I was really feeling guilty about having sex outside of marriage. So I was like, well, I got to get married again if I ever want to have sex again. Like, for fuck's sake, if I want to fuck, I got to get married, which is so toxic and so terrible. And I wish that I had not ever had that in my mind, but I was raised and seeped in evangelical culture. And then I actually worked in an evangelical ministry for several years. So it was just ingrained in me, like, all of my life. And so if I had just let myself be like, Grace, just fuck whoever you want to fuck and don't worry about getting married right now. Like, that is the least of your issues. Like, I literally can't believe that that factored into my decision. Like, I want to be able to have sex guilt-free. It's just like, I just need to woosa on that. I am freed from evangelicalism, FYI. Even though I still follow Jesus, I'm still a Jesus follower, but I do not follow toxic. I have decolonized and divested from evangelical Christianity, but I still follow Jesus. I'm still a very religious, spiritual person. Anyway, so I had that, and the vulnerability, the financial vulnerability, the emotional vulnerability, the evangelical toxic purity culture vulnerability, and then he love bombed. And so I rushed into a marriage, and I mean rushed, like not as much as she did, but similar, because mine was 8 months from the time we met till we were married. And then I was pregnant within 10 months from the time we met until we got married. But anyway, so I noticed that she had family support. She also had her own house and her own car and a job. And I'm telling you, these things really do matter. This is a cautionary tale, y'all. Like the reason why I got into a situation that deeply traumatized me in part was because I had a car, but I had just lost a job, and I had an apartment that I really couldn't afford. Because I had just lost, I just said that, because I lost a job. So I think that the financial dependence piece is a big deal. It's a really, 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 really big deal. And for anyone out there who might be hearing this, don't ever, and I think Reesa would say this too, don't ever, 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 ever consider marriage because you are financially vulnerable. Like, it's just not, it's not 1920. It's not 1920 or 1930 or 1940, where that was almost kind of expected. And some of those women could still meet good men back then because it was like expected, like, oh, I'm going to take care of you. Now, if you're a woman who's financially vulnerable like that, men will use that to trap you, because the good men, most of them, from what I can see, they're not going out trying to find the brokest woman they can find to lift her up. They're finding women who are on an equal level, like commiserate with what they're making. But like when a toxic man sees a very vulnerable woman, financially vulnerable, he's like, let me pounce, you know. And in this situation with Reesa, that wasn't her vulnerability. Her vulnerability was not money. It was that she wanted to get married so damn bad and wanted to be, you know, in a partnership, and wanted her fairy tale story, like she acknowledged and took accountability for. And I was so appreciative that she said that. And in the same way, I take accountability that I made the stupidest choice for getting married, even in part basing it on finances, because what I should have done was just let myself be completely poor and rebuilt without anything, especially not without adding a husband and a new baby. Although I love my baby girl, and I, you know, it's one of those hard things, because like when you look back on stuff, like I would never trade not having her, but the circumstances were hard. Anyway, back to Reesa. So that's one thing. Another thing that I think really saved her is that she had a sense of self and a sense of self-worth that I think a lot of women who are very vulnerable, who get with men like this, the kind of women that men like him prey on, is women who don't have a sense of self-worth and self-love. And I can tell y'all, I don't know if it's the number one, but it's in the top 2 or 3 reasons that I think my ex-husband chose me as his next woman to abolish her heart and soul, is because I didn't really have a strong sense. No, I'm not even gonna say really. I did not have a strong sense of self-love and self-worth. Like I said, I was still feeling very decimated from my divorce. The last thing I needed to be doing at that point was dating. So yeah, I have to, like her, I have to acknowledge when you make stupid mistakes, especially with the gravity of marriage, like it's not something to be played with. It's not something to be played with. And not that I was playing with, and I don't think she was either, but it's not something to put on a pedestal over some things that we now know are pretty basic. Like, do not be financially dependent on a man. Do not be financially dependent on a man. We know that much at this point. Even when you're married, I mean, all the advice, because I'm not married anymore. right? I don't have a boyfriend. I'm single as a Pringle right now. I mean, I like somebody, but I'm talking to somebody. But other than that, like, I have pretty much vowed I will never ever be financially dependent on a man ever again. Whether he's my boyfriend, whether we're engaged, or whether we're married. If I ever get married again, because I've been married twice and I feel significantly burned out on that whole thing. That whole thing just feels very precarious. So I don't know. But anyway, that's beside the point. But when she left, and the way that she left, I was so proud of her for making such a decisive choice. So I want to speak to the trauma survivors right now who had trauma bonds. Trauma bonds are a very powerful addiction whereby a victim of an abusive person is addicted to the abuse cycles and to the abuser itself. This is also called Stockholm Syndrome, although Stockholm Syndrome is something different, but that's also a very real natural occurrence that is widely studied. Trauma bonds are like less talked about. People almost always use it wrong. They think it means people bonding over their trauma, which is like a entirely different subject. It's more about, it really should be called trauma addiction in some ways, or like abuser addiction, because I experienced very, very powerful trauma bonds. Like, for example, Reesa said something like, what'd she say? She said when she found out about the prostitute, she said, I wasn't even fazed. She was like, I was just happy because I felt like now I have my reason to get a divorce and God ain't gonna be mad at me because I got infidelity, so I can leave. She was like, I was not even fazed to see, him with these, that he'd slept with a prostitute. And for me, that was so different. And everybody handles grief so differently, but for me, when I found out about the first woman, like, I was so heartbroken and so heavy. But the first woman for me was kind of like when she had the realization about the houses and how he just liked to see her be hurt. I realized that later, but the first woman for me was heartbreaking. It was heart-wrenching. And then the night that I went into early labor with our daughter is when I found out about 3 women, and that he had been active on Match for the whole time we were engaged. He had been active on Match.com, had been exchanging, had gotten all these emails, had opened emails, and had interacted with someone like literally the weekend after he proposed to me. It was a lot at once when I realized, like, I don't know who he is. The person I thought he is not who he is at all. Anyway, for me, that produced a trauma, like a very powerful trauma bond. And I stayed for so much longer than her, for 4 more years than she did, because I was so trauma bonded. I was very addicted to him and very addicted to the abuse cycles, which the abuse cycle, like, the abuse happens. And then they do this thing where it's called the honeymoon phase, where they try to get you back to the honeymoon phase. They spoil you, they buy you stuff, they tell you you're beautiful, that they love you. They make you feel like everything's right in your world. And you're like, oh, I must be crazy, and then perhaps there's some gaslighting in there. Like, yeah, that thing that happened, that really wasn't a big deal. And then you're feeling really like almost euphoric. And then the abuse happens again. And that cycle produces heightened cortisol in your body, which can be very, very addictive. And some people say, and I completely believe them, people who say that they have been on heroin, which I've never done any hard drugs. I've never done heroin or crack or cocaine or anything. So I don't know what that feels like. I don't even drink. I think I've only been drunk once in my life. So I don't really know. And I don't smoke weed. So I don't know what it feels like to be high. But people who have been addicted to things like heroin and crack or cocaine, and also been trauma bonded, have said that the trauma bond is far worse, far harder to get over than heroin. Okay, I've heard this in several different places. I know that there were some studies about it. I'm not sure what the outcome of those studies were about, like, if you can verify this, if you can even verify it. But all I know is that trauma bonds are a very powerful addiction. And Reesa didn't have that. And actually, that was one of the most surprising things for me when I meet other survivors who aren't trauma bonded. I have met probably, I would say, 5 or so of the women I coached were very trauma bonded. There was one other person who was extremely trauma bonded to her very psychopathic ex-husband. She was extremely trauma bonded. Maybe me and her were like on the same level. I've never met anyone else who was as trauma bonded as I was as her. And then some who were a little bit. And then like you have Reesa over here, and I know some other women too who were just like, yeah, they were just like, I hate him. I want him out. I never want to see him again. I don't even know. Watching her story, I was like, I don't even know what it feels like. I don't even know what that feels like to just, because yeah, the way she very decisively was like, get out. She donated all his stuff. I mean, my experience was so different. And I was in awe. I think it's amazing that she was able to do that. You can go watch my 6-part series, but I don't know how much. I don't even remember now because I filmed that like 3 years ago now, but I don't remember what I said about trauma bonded and how trauma bonded I was. But it was very hard for the people around me because my sense of self-worth was still so low, which, is a product of being abused and having your confidence shot, and like it's just, you're spiraling. So you're just continuing to spiral. So how do you build that back up if you don't have the proper support, or if people like aren't believing you in the midst of it, and you just spiral further? And that's what happened with me. So yeah, anyway, this story, I think it's a great warning for all of us. Those of us who are narc abuse survivors, be gentle with yourself and take your time with this story. I definitely had to cry yesterday, and I had to sit with the ways that I was so ashamed of myself. Like so ashamed of myself for what I did and stayed so long, and the ways that I tried so hard to change him, the ways that I tried so hard to get him to understand how he was hurting me, the ways that I addressed it, addressed everything. One thing that I appreciated that she did, some people might not agree with this, but some of the time she let him get away with the lie, and she didn't have to deal with the stress of it. I fought so hard about everything in the name of trying to get him to see and understand, like, when you lie to me about every little thing, it hurts so much more. Like, if you would just be honest, this would hurt so much less. Like, it would just be a healing balm if I like actually knew the truth. But he just wasn't willing to do that. He wasn't willing to do that. And I think what Reesa did was she was just like, I don't care anymore. She went numb so much faster than, oh my God, my cat is driving me crazy, than I did, or other women. Could you get your booty? Y'all can't see him. He won't get down. She went numb. And I don't know. I don't even know if I ever did. I think by the end there was, no, I never did. I never went numb. I never went numb to it. And I think that's just because we're humans, and humans are different. And like, obviously I have a lot of childhood trauma. I'm not sure what she didn't mention that, but I have a ton of childhood trauma. And I'm a survivor of very severe childhood sexual assault from my father. And I think that led to obviously different outcomes for me as well. But like, even in the end, even while we were leaving, even when he had a new girlfriend after he moved out, I was still not numb. I was still screaming, thrashing, and crying about that. Anyway, I just wanted to put my little 2 cents in about this whole story, because I think that it's, I think while it's fascinating, what we need to remember is that there's a lot of men out there who are like this. And it's not exactly the way Legion did it, right? Like the pathological lying, it looks different, but there's a lot of men who are this toxic and this predatory. And you know, I've heard stats that it's 1% of the population, like the global population. So let's just say, I don't know how many people there are on the planet. I think 8 billion. Is it 8 billion now? I'm not sure. But let's say there's 8 billion people on the planet. 1%, oh my God, I don't even know. Is 1% 8 million? I don't know. I actually don't know that. Let's just say it's 8 million for the sake of those of us who can't do math off the top of our head. That's a lot of people, y'all. That's a lot of people. 8 million people over the planet, if my numbers are correct. So I'm just saying, like, be careful. Be careful. And for those of us who are survivors, one thing I ain't never gonna do again is rush into any goddamn thing and let anybody love on me for any reason whatsoever. So anyway, thank you for watching. Bye, y'all.